it's Webs here with a big Mercenary update. I know I'm a little bit behind schedule on this Hearthstone news, but I still wanted to cover it, especially this one, because there is a big rework for Hearthstone Mercenaries, and it's a really good news for the players and people wanting to actually get into the game. So let's start off with it. The first thing that was changed is the task system, and with the new patch that came out today, instead of actually farming for mysterious challengers, they're lowering the rate of mysterious challengers, but make it where if you complete a task for a given mercenary, you automatically get the next task in the line of tasks for each mercenary, which makes it a lot easier to actually farm tasks when new mercenaries come out. This is a really good change overall. I haven't really played much today to test this out, and I do have a lot of the tasks actually done, so this won't affect me until new mercenaries actually come out. But it is really nice to see a positive change for once in this game mode. And then there were also two other changes announced. The first one being the fact that there's only going to be one new mercenary that comes out with the new set, and they're going to slow down the rate that they actually release new mercenaries. The new mercenary in question is Murky, which you're going to get for free on the battle pass if I remember right, and he is a Murloc fighter with the first ability at level 5 being Slime Time. That has a nature school, speed of 4, deal 12 damage to an enemy, give it taunt until the end of the next turn. So this is really good for Murloc teams because most of the Murlocs are actually attack based, so you can just focus something down that you normally wouldn't be able to hit, and should be a really strong ability overall in a Murloc team. The second ability being Bubbly Bobble, and at level 5 it is a nature ability with a speed of 4, a cooldown of 1. It restores 11 health to an adjacent Murloc, swap places, and both gain Divine Shield. Nature combo, repeat this. Again, another very strong ability for a Murloc team. It also acts as a pseudo long shin for Murlocs, which is pretty cool to see. It's a bit slower, which makes it a little bit worse, but I can see this actually seeing a lot of play. And finally, we have Puffer Fisher as the final ability for Murky, which is a speed of 7 with a cooldown of 1. It summons a Murloc with 10 HP and 15 attack, and has the death rattle, deal damage equal to this minion's attack to 3 random enemies. This requires a lot of setup, which means it's probably bad in the end, but it's a really funny skill, and I really look forward to actually trying to use this in combination with Old Murkai and some of the other mercenaries. For his first equipment, it's Time to Krill, which is a passive. Whenever a friendly Murloc attacks an enemy with taunt, give them +4 attack. This will allow you to just focus down any target with his first ability pretty easily. The second equipment being Slippery When Wet, which is a passive that after one of your characters lose Divine Shield or Frozen, its next ability is 3 speed faster. This is probably to try to counter some of the Frost builds, but we'll see some later on changes that might make those a little bit less playable. And finally, we have March of Murloc, and at level 4 you summon 2 10/10 Murlocs. I think the first equipment is probably going to be the default equipment for Murky, as it is the one that allows you to just scale up their attack damage as much as humanly possible, and allows you to actually maybe kill a targeted mercenary in one turn. Though this mercenary doesn't really solve the issues of Murlocs currently, where there is no protector Murloc currently in Mercenaries, but I do think this is a really good step in the right direction and way better than Vanessa, who was the previous free mercenary. Now time for the final bit of this mercenary update: balance changes and reworks. And by reworks, some of these are just straight up nerfed, which are great, especially because, man, some of these mercenaries really did need nerfs, and I never expected this to ever happen, just given the fact of how Mercenary currently works. I did expect to see some buffs, maybe as a way to actually change the meta a little bit, but not many. The first one being to Baron Geddon, increasing his stat line by 4, which doesn't really do that much overall, makes him a little bit more tanky and more survivable. His equipment, Molten Blade, is also going to increase his first ability's damage by 7 now instead of 4. I don't think this makes it any better than Mark of Configuration, which is his default equipment currently, but I could maybe see it if we see some more fire-based mercenaries where you just want to speed them up. King Mukla's first ability is going to have a lower speed, which means it's going to be faster, which is pretty good overall. Might fit in a Vander-based build now. It really depends on how you want to focus it down. The real big changes to Mukla are to his two equipments. The first one giving him additional 5 HP from every banana he eats or gives to other mercenaries. And the third equipment, instead of gaining +2 additional attack, it's +4 additional attack. I think this probably will see some play in some type of weird build where you're trying to buff up some beasts as quickly as possible, but I do think his big brother is probably going to be the default choice still. The next mercenary that is getting changed is Zyrilla. Her atonement, aka her third ability, actually dealing 20 damage baseline instead of 15, which is a decent enough change, but the big change for her is to her equipment, Robes of Purity, which makes it where the atonement requires 10 less healing to upgrade instead of 5, which is a huge change and might actually change the way people use Zyrilla, but I do think most people will probably still settle for the first equipment, at least until someone figures out a really good holy comp where you can just heal a bunch while keeping her alive, as she will have a huge target on her back if you do use this equipment instead. I do think this is really cool to see, and it does push her forward into the meta a little bit more, as she kind of has fallen off of favor a little bit nowadays. So Scabs is the next mercenary that got a buff, first to his stat line, which makes him a little bit more tanky, and to two of his equipments, the first one being SI Contract, where the bonus effect is being doubled, and then for Honing Rod, the Shadow Blade additional attack is increased to 10 instead of 4. I don't think this will actually make him see any play. He is already quite a weak mercenary as it currently stands. He just doesn't have any synergy with any other mercenaries except for Valera, and you would never want to use her equipment that actually allows to buff up stealth mercenaries over the just generally really good speed increase for mercenaries that everyone uses with her, especially given the fact that Scabs is the only other stealth mercenary as it currently stands. Millhouse is getting buffed next, and this one actually might change something. His stat line is being increased by 5, just making him a little bit more beefy, and his greater arcane missiles is going to be increased to 20 damage each instead of 15, which is a really strong change and really good. And his arcane powder equipment is going to increase the damage of arcane explosion by 5 and makes enemies lose stealth. The lose stealth part is the important part here. Millhouse was already a mercenary that had a lot of potential. The issue is he's always been a glass cannon, and I think arcane powder will just be the default equipment for him always at this point. As long as you need to get rid of stealth and people keep using Valera, it's a really nice change to see, and it should give some diversity in the meta game. So the next mercenary that is getting buffed is Cariel. Her attack is being increased by 1, which shouldn't really matter too much. Her first ability is actually getting buffed up as its healing increased by 20, which is actually pretty insane overall. And her equipment of Tome of Light, which is her default equipment most of the time, is being increased to 12 attack instead of 8. Though, given the fact that Crusader Blow is getting buffed up to 60 HP, I could honestly see the equipment that also gives the healing to all your other mercenaries see a lot more play now. Now for Uther, man, I wish some of these changes had went through before I had used Uther in a build. The first one being restoring an additional 4 HP to a friendly character. With Blessing of Protection, a really good change overall, should make the Vander build a little bit stronger. The equipment Lightbringer is also going to be increased to 2 more damage instead of just having 4. It's going to be 6, decent kind of. And finally, Gleaming Cauldrons are going to increase Avenging Wrath's damage by 8 instead of 4, which is actually probably the change that will be the most seen if people start using him again in holy builds. It looks like Holy is actually winning out a lot with a lot of these changes, which is kind of cool to see. Though it is an annoying build to play against, at least it isn't as annoying as Frost. Garrosh is the next mercenary that got buffed, and his attack is being increased by 1, which, again, shouldn't really do too much, but I guess it is what it is. And Orcish Banner will now restore 15 health to orcs instead of 10. This is probably a decent change overall, but I think people will still use the equipment that increases the amount of HP he gains from Horde Strength or whatever gives him HP and Taunt. Captain Galvanger is also getting buffed. He's getting 8 additional HP, which should matter a lot for him. He always was kind of like a glass cannon. And the really big changes are to Rendering Cleave, where the bleed effect is going to be increased to 12 instead of being 8, which is really insane. That's probably the biggest bleed we can currently get. And his equipment of Drekthar's Boon is also going to be increased to a bleed of 10 instead of 15, which should be a really good counter for Sinestra. Even some of the other changes to some of the other mercenaries, if they hadn't done anything about Sinestra, I think dragons would have just dominated the meta. It's good to see something like this. It should give orcs a better chance of actually living. Rathian, which is one of my favorite mercenaries, is the next one who's getting buffed up. His stat line is being increased to 1279, decent enough, and his Creeping Madness is going to make it where if the opponent uses the same skill the following turn, take 25 damage instead of 20. Decent enough change, but I don't think it'll matter too much. And the Black Dragon Scales equipment is also getting buffed up, where it's going to be a bleed of 10 instead of 5. I think this is pretty cool, but it isn't as good as the Drekthar's Boon buff, just because of the fact that Fatal Strike also prevents healing. I would have wished to see something with his final ability getting buffed up, but I guess that would have probably made him a little bit too strong. Vanessa is the next mercenary getting buffed, and she's gaining 3 additional attack, and her Burglar Barrage is going to, instead of stealing attack after she attacks, steal it before, which should make her a little bit better, though she is a really weak mercenary overall, so I don't know if this will be enough. And Extra Pockets, her equipment, is going to allow her to store up to 10 attack instead of 5, which is actually probably a better change between the two, though I think the equipment that always makes her steal attack is probably going to be the equipment still being used if you are trying to use her in a build, and I don't think this will make Vanessa any more playable. Tyrande is getting buffed up too, and her Arcane Salvo is instead going to deal 12 damage to 2 random enemies, and if any die, repeats this. This is a huge change to Arcane based builds. It's nice to see Arcane actually becoming a fully functional build, and her equipment that actually increases the damage of Arcane Shot will increase Arcane Shot's damage by 15 if the enemy has already acted instead of 5. I think this change is a really bad change overall, though the Arcane Salvo might actually save her from suffering a fate where she doesn't see any play. I do think Arcane's looking like a really nice team to try out again, especially given all these buffs. And now we get to Varian. Varian is getting a shit ton of changes. His first ability is going to increase the attack of humans by 15 instead of 12 if he gets the death blow. I don't think this will matter too much. His Heroic Leap is going to deal 14 damage, and then your other humans in play and on bench are permanently 1 speed faster. This is a huge change and will make him a lot more playable. And finally, Retaliation is now going to increase attack and HP, which is going to make Varian a really annoying mercenary to actually play against. And then they're also changing War Banner equipment to give +2, +10 instead of +4. I think this is probably a decent enough change overall, and there's no way Varian doesn't actually see some type of play if attack-based teams see a lot of play, because this should make him a very devastating force against some of the more powerful dragon-based builds that are currently floating around. And now for Gul'dan. Gul'dan's Reign of Destruction is going to have a speed of 8 and a cooldown of 0. Doesn't really change much. It's the ability that you use the least with him, so until we see more fel support, it is what it is. And then Staff of Chaos equipment is now going to give +4 spell damage if a orc or demon dies. This is a really good change. It should have been what it was originally. It's kind of weird that it wasn't, but this should allow Fel-based builds to maybe exist even more, though it does suck that the best Fel payoff currently for a Fel-based team is probably Rathian, and this won't affect Rathian at all unless you bring out Rathian late game, and then he's going to have a huge target on his back. But it is a cool change overall to see. And now for Trigor. Trigor frenzy attack is going to now attack an enemy, and if this took damage this turn, deal 16 damage instead of 12 to a random adjacent enemy. Decent enough buff. It helps a lot with local R, which is probably what they're trying to do with Trigor, especially given the buff to the next ability of his, which is Backlash. And at level 5, he gains +5 attack, and each time an enemy damages a adjacent ally this turn, deal this mercenary's attack to them. This is a huge change. This is definitely the local R counter that we've been looking for quite a while now. And I can't see a world where Trigor doesn't see some play, even in builds where you can't buff him up that much. Sure, he can be easily killed by some of the other Frost-based mercenaries in a Frost team, but this is really devastating against local R in particular, especially because you might be able to just nuke local R and most of your opponent's mercenaries off the board with this ability. Sneed is the next mercenary who's getting buffed up. It's nice to see more pirates getting buffed. And now he's going to gain, with Active Saw, a additional 3 attack, bringing it up to 9 instead of 6. I don't think this is enough to make him any better. His equipment Skull Dust is going to increase the bleed to 10. This seems to be a similar buff to all the other bleed equipments that we've seen so far. I don't think this will see much play because of this. And finally, Extra Blades, which makes him start Active Saw 5 for 2 turns instead of 1. A good enough change, probably is going to be the default equipment for him, though I don't think anyone's going to try to use him in anything. Though it is nice to see the pirates getting buffed up, especially the next one. Edwin, his first ability is being buffed up to 10 HP instead of 5 if the target hasn't acted, which is a good enough change. His Kingpin Bounty is going to have a cooldown of 1 instead of 2, which makes it a lot better. Should have been like this at the beginning. Black Flag is going to make all of your other pirates 4 speed faster. This is a huge change. It still frustrates me that it doesn't speed him up, but this does make him a lot better in builds with Eudora, where you don't actually have to keep her adjacent to him always, and you can put some cannons in between her and him as a way to buffer between some AoE cleave. It's a really cool change to see, and might make him actually see some play in some type of weird Eudora build, but I very much doubt it in the end. And finally, his other equipment even shares, which makes King's Bounty restore 15 more health, and also affects all friendly characters. Really nice heal for pirates, but again, I think Black Flag is just going to be the overall better equipment as it currently is right now. Now, the next 4 changes can all be talked about together since they're basically all the same change. They all add the condition that they lose stealth on whatever target actually are hit by one of the following abilities: for Thrall, Lightning Storm; for Manaroth, Howl of Terror; for Ragnaros, Die Insects; for Master Voon, Axe Throw. And honestly, I think this is a really nice change. It helps fight Valera, which is something that we actually need, and gives some more variety in just the counters besides only having to run Yulon. Now for the rework that Blizzard said. And the final mercenary that's actually getting changed, Varden. Varden's Flurry ability is going to be changed from dealing 6 damage to 3 random enemy mercs, and they are 2 speed slower next turn, to shoot 3 missiles at random enemies that deal 7 damage each, and slow for 2 speeds next turn. So this change is absolutely huge when it comes to Varden. Varden before this change could not hit tokens, which meant they would always hit a mercenary and thus slowing down the mercenaries, which was a huge annoyance, really unfun to actually play against. It's one of the major things that a lot of people have been calling for nerfs to, is the frost builds, and this is a really nice change for that. It's funny that they're describing this as a rework when it's really just a nerf, and Chilling Amulet is going to deal 14 damage instead of 8. I guess this makes sense. If you're going to nerf their first ability as much as they did, you have to give some type of compensation to the players who have leveled up Varden fully, and that's probably the best way to do it, is by buffing up his equipment. I'm just so happy to see Frost seeing some type of nerf and a lot of targeted buffs to other mercenaries who try to make Frost a lot worse and make some of the other synergies a lot better. And like always, if you enjoyed the video, please leave a like, comment, and subscribe. And until next time, bye bye.